My daughter told me she wanted a daddy-daughter trip before she settled down. I booked us a week in Italy, my treat. Halfway through the trip, I noticed she barely spoke to me, always texting. On the last day, she revealed she had used the trip to meet up with her stepdad and show him around Europe for the first time. He's never traveled before, she said, and I thought it would be special. I smiled and nodded. What happened next was rather unexpected. I will tell you everything. First, if you enjoy stories like this, you want to be part of the 10% of our viewers who click on the like button. This really makes us happy. If you are yet to subscribe to our channel, kindly support us today by subscribing to this channel. This helps us to bring you more beautiful stories. It will be great to tell us where you are watching us from in the comments section. Now let's get into the details of the story. I'd always believed that when it came down to it, I was the kind of father who showed up. Not in loud, flashy ways. No viral videos of surprise car keys or expensive prom dresses, but in steady, consistent ones. I paid for dance classes when her mom was between jobs. I taught her how to drive in the parking lot of her old middle school, gripping the passenger side handle for dear life while she laughed, carefree, foot heavy on the gas. After the divorce, when she was 9, I made sure she had a room at my place that felt like home, not just a stopover. Her mother remarried 2 years later, and suddenly there was a new man she had to call stepdad, some guy who brought her electronics and let her watch PG-13 movies early. I didn't hate him. I just quietly stepped to the side, like a man who had been asked to move out of a photo. But through it all, I stayed her dad, the real one. And when she texted me on a random Tuesday that she wanted a daddy-daughter trip before I settled down for real, I almost dropped my coffee in shock. I stared at that message for a long minute. It felt like a door opening again, like maybe I wasn't invisible. Not yet. The planning gave me something to hold on to. I dove in like a man building a memory from blueprints. I asked her what she wanted to see, and she sent a list that lit up my chest. Rome, Florence, Venice. You pick the rest, Dad. I trust your taste. That line stayed with me for days. I'd spent years trying to gauge how much space I was allowed in her life. Some holidays felt strained, like she was fulfilling a duty more than visiting out of joy. But this trip felt like a turning point. I cashed out some savings, money I'd been keeping for new siding on the house, and poured it into 7 days of first-class flights, boutique hotels, private tours, and meals she'd remember forever. I even found a restaurant in Tuscany where you could eat in a wine cave lit only by candles. I could already picture her there, laughing, cheeks flushed with joy, her hand reaching for mine across the table. I told myself this was what fatherhood was supposed to feel like, not obligation, but shared wonder. When we landed in Rome, she was tired, jet-lagged, and barely spoke on the ride to the hotel. I didn't take it personally. I chalked it up to exhaustion and told her to nap while I unpacked. That first night, we had dinner on a rooftop overlooking the city. She wore a sundress I hadn't seen before, something elegant and grown, and I realized, not for the first time, how much time had passed. She wasn't my little girl anymore. She was a woman on the edge of her own life, talking about careers in real estate and timelines for engagement. Still, for a few hours, it felt like old times. We talked about her favorite college professor, how she missed my lasagna, how her mom's new dog kept chewing through chargers. She even laughed when I got sauce on my shirt. "You always do that," she said, shaking her head like I was some lovable fool. I went to bed that night thinking this trip might actually heal something between us. Maybe she just needed to see me outside the context of her mother's world, where I was always cast as the supporting role to her husband's lead. By day 2, though, the shift had already begun. It was subtle at first. She stayed glued to her phone during tours, nodded distractedly during meals, and passed on a gondola ride in Venice saying she felt kind of off. I told her we could rest, but she insisted I go alone. I floated through those canals with a hollow chest, holding her empty seat in every photo. She said she had a headache. I believed her, why wouldn't I? Still, something gnawed at me quietly, like a thread pulling loose at the edge of a sweater. I caught her grinning at her screen once when she thought I wasn't looking, her thumbs dancing with energy I hadn't seen aimed at me since we landed. But I pushed the doubt aside. I didn't come here to play detective. I came to give her a memory she'd keep forever. One she might tell her kids about someday. Your grandpa took me to Italy once, she'd say. Just the two of us. It was magical. That fantasy kept me warm, even when her side of the table grew colder. The strangest moment came midweek when we were in Florence, walking past the Duomo. She said she needed to stop into a pharmacy. I'll be quick, she said, sliding into a side street. But 20 minutes passed. Then 30. I stood there like a lost tourist, unsure whether to call or wait. When she returned, she looked flushed, adjusting her ponytail. Sorry, long line, she said too quickly. Let's grab gelato? I nodded, but something inside me tilted. I glanced behind her, down that narrow alley, half expecting someone to emerge. No one did. Still, I couldn't shake the sense that I wasn't alone on this trip. That somehow, I'd funded a vacation where I was playing third wheel to a ghost I hadn't invited. And yet, even then, I didn't say anything. I still wanted to believe the best. I still remembered that little girl who used to fall asleep in the back seat of my car after softball practice, clutching her glove like a teddy bear. I didn't want to accuse her. I didn't want to sound paranoid or bitter. Instead, I leaned harder into being cheerful. I bought her souvenirs she barely acknowledged. I made dinner reservations she canceled last minute. I told myself we all have off days. That maybe the pressure of making memories was too much. Maybe she was just overwhelmed. But on the final night, when she finally told me the truth, it all clicked. And that truth? It would slice through every excuse I'd made like a knife through pasta. By the 5th day, the city had started to blur. I knew I was in Rome, but I didn't feel like I was there. Not really. I wandered through history with a woman who barely looked up from her phone, snapping a few obligatory pictures at landmarks while texting with the kind of smile she used to save for our inside jokes. It wasn't just that she was distracted, it was the type of absence you can't fix with a nap or a conversation. It felt planned, deliberate. I tried to tell myself that I was imagining it, that I was being overly sensitive, but something in my gut had gone quiet. The kind of quiet that only comes when you've been somewhere too long without being seen. We stood in the Colosseum surrounded by tourists and I asked, "Do you want to do the audio tour?" And she barely looked up. "Nah, I've seen this in photos a million times," she said. Then, back to scrolling. I took the tour anyway. Alone. She disappeared for the first time the next morning. I woke up to an empty hotel room, the kind of sterile stillness that made it feel like I was waking up in a stranger's space. Her side of the bed was made, the bathroom door open, her luggage still by the window. For a second, I thought maybe she'd gone downstairs for breakfast, so I texted her, "You up?" 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Finally, a reply, "Taking a day trip, don't wait up." I stared at the message, reread it twice. It was so breezy, like she was letting me know she was running to the grocery store, not disappearing in a foreign country without her travel partner. I tried to laugh it off. Maybe she wanted space. Maybe she was meeting an old college friend. But deep down, I knew I wasn't the person she was here for. I sat at the tiny desk in our room and stared out the window. The Roman skyline blinked back at me, indifferent. By noon, I'd checked the hotel lobby, called her name in the hallway, even strolled through nearby cafes hoping she'd be there, sipping espresso and waving me over like it had all been a misunderstanding. She wasn't. I ate lunch alone, some overpriced carbonara at a tourist trap near the Trevi Fountain, surrounded by couples and families pointing and laughing, taking selfies I pretended not to envy. The food was bland, the waiter rushed, but I stayed there for nearly an hour just to avoid going back to the silence of the room. I remember texting her again, "Everything okay? Need anything?" But she didn't respond until nearly 6 p.m. "All good. Be back late." That was it. No explanation. No apology. I felt like a stranger in my own plans, the invisible sponsor of someone else's itinerary. That night, she came back around 10, glowing and breathless like someone who'd just fallen in love. Her hair was windblown, her cheeks rosy, and she had shopping bags in both hands, little boutique names I didn't recognize. "Sorry I disappeared," she said, already walking past me to the bathroom. "Crazy day. Just needed to clear my head." I stood in the doorway, staring at her reflection in the mirror. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "Where'd you go?" I asked, keeping my voice light. She shrugged. Just around. Took a train. Got lunch in Orvieto. Pretty place. You'd love it. But she didn't offer details, didn't ask me about my day, and once she changed into pajamas, she climbed into bed and started scrolling again like nothing had happened. That was when I knew in the marrow of my bones, that I was being used. Not maliciously, maybe, but definitely strategically. And yet, I still didn't confront her. I swallowed my disappointment, tucked it under the pillow, and lay next to her in the dark, staring at the ceiling, wondering who she'd really spent the day with. The final blow didn't come until our last full day. I'd booked us a private walking tour through the Trastevere district, complete with a street food tasting. It was supposed to be our grand finale, a casual, slow-paced afternoon before dinner and packing. She agreed to come, barely glancing up from her phone as we started walking. The guide was warm, engaging, throwing in little jokes about Roman history, pointing out hidden bakeries and frescoes I never would have noticed alone. I tried to enjoy it, to salvage what I could, but every time I turned to share a moment with her, she was half a step behind, whispering into her phone. Finally, during a stop at a small wine bar, she leaned in and said, "Hey, I actually have to duck out for a bit. I promised I'd meet someone near the Pantheon. It won't take long." I blinked at her. "Someone? Who?" And that's when it slipped. That's when she finally told me the truth. "It's just Marcus," she said, casual, too casual. "I've been showing him around. He's never been to Europe before." My stomach dropped. "Marcus, your stepdad?" She nodded, sipping her wine like we were discussing tomorrow's weather. "Yeah, he flew in 2 days after us. I thought it would be special, to show him all this. He's always wanted to come." I stared at her, trying to keep my expression neutral while everything inside me went cold. "So all those days you disappeared, the texts, the detours, you were with him?" She tilted her head, slightly defensive. "He's important to me too, Dad. It wasn't a big deal. But to me it was. It was a revelation. I wasn't her travel partner. I was the financier, the background character funding the real story. I didn't yell. I didn't cause a scene. I just nodded, slowly, and said, 'Makes sense now.' She smiled, relieved. 'I knew you'd understand. You're so chill about this stuff.' And that's when I knew I wouldn't be finishing this trip. Not on those terms. Not as a tag-along on my own dime. I left the tour early that afternoon, told the guide something about needing to take a call, smiled politely, then walked away without looking back. The moment I rounded the corner and was out of my daughter's line of sight, the weight of it all hit me like a dropped suitcase. Not just this trip, everything. Years of holding my tongue, pretending that I didn't notice how she slowly turned more toward the life her mother built with Marcus, how I became less of a fixture and more of an obligation. And now here I was, halfway across the world, paying to be dismissed, paying to be replaced. While she took him, the man her mother married when she was 11, on his first trip abroad, making memories under the guise of our daddy-daughter time. It wasn't even the secrecy that got me, not entirely. It was the ease of it. The way she said his name with affection, the way she called it special, like I was supposed to agree. That word clung to my ribs like wet cloth. Special. Was I ever special anymore? Or just useful? I walked aimlessly through Trastevere after I left, hands buried in my pockets, 2 days to think about food or sights or the camera I hadn't touched in days. My mind kept rewinding to all the little signs I'd ignored. The solo gondola ride in Venice, the whispered texts, the shopping bags I never saw her open. Each moment I'd chalked up to jet lag or mood swings or growing up now rearranged itself into a clear, humiliating picture. She had used me. Not violently, not cruelly, but with calculation. She had crafted a narrative where I was generous enough to foot the bill and trusting enough to keep my mouth shut. And I had walked right into it, smiling the whole way. I remember sitting on a stone bench near a small fountain, watching the water trickle and thinking, this is how you become the background character in someone else's scrapbook. I wasn't the highlight reel. I was the hotel reservation, the flight upgrade, the man who made her plans possible so she could chase closeness with someone else. Later that night, we shared one of the most surreal dinners of my life. It was a restaurant I'd booked weeks ago. An open-air rooftop with string lights and views of the Vatican Dome. I had reserved it imagining a warm, slow evening where we'd reflect on everything we'd seen and done, maybe even toast to each other and laugh about our clumsy Italian. Instead, I sat across from her as she scrolled on her phone in between bites, texting furiously. Her smile wasn't for me. It hadn't been for days. I didn't say much. I nodded when appropriate, asked no questions. I knew if I opened my mouth, something would come out that couldn't be taken back. She barely noticed my silence. At one point, she even asked me if I thought we could stop by the Trevi fountain the next morning, for Marcus. He didn't get to see it, she said, and I figured maybe we could go with him. I paused mid-chew. We? I asked. She blinked. Yeah, unless you're too tired or whatever. He's just never been outside the States. I thought it'd be cool. That word again, cool. Like this wasn't a slap in the face. Like I wasn't sitting across from my daughter while she made plans to sightsee with the man she'd snuck around to entertain all week. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the hotel lobby until nearly 3 a.m., nursing a lukewarm cappuccino and scrolling through flight options on my phone. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. What I felt was quieter than that, like being submerged underwater, watching someone laugh at the surface while you sank. I couldn't decide what hurt more, that she'd used me, or that she hadn't even considered how it might feel, that I hadn't mattered enough to even deserve a real conversation before she decided to turn our time together into someone else's vacation. At one point, I pulled up an old photo on my phone, her and I at the zoo when she was 6, her arm wrapped around my neck, grinning so wide her cheeks puffed out. I looked at that little girl and asked myself if she'd still recognize the man sitting here now, or if Marcus had gently, over time, rewritten her idea of dad until I was just a backup option. When she finally came down the next morning, dressed in a fresh sundress and sunglasses, she looked genuinely surprised to see me with my bag packed. You ready? She asked, pulling her phone out like she always did. I stood, slung my bag over my shoulder, and said, I changed my flight. I'm leaving early. That finally got her attention. She lowered her phone. What? Why? We have one more day. I shrugged. Figured you'd want the day free. For Marcus. Her face shifted, somewhere between confusion and defensiveness. Dad, don't be like that. I thought we were having a good time. I looked at her for a long second. Did you? I asked. Her mouth opened like she wanted to say something else, but then she didn't. She just stood there, half-turned, holding her phone like a lifeline. I didn't hug her. I didn't say goodbye. I walked out into the morning light, the sound of Rome waking up behind me, and hailed a cab. At the airport, I sat by the window watching planes take off, wondering how many other parents had stories like mine, moments where they realized they weren't the hero of the story anymore. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even bitter. What I felt was more like grief. Like I'd lost something without knowing when it slipped through my fingers. And maybe I had. Maybe I'd been losing her for years, and this trip was just the moment I finally stopped lying to myself about it. I closed my eyes and let the jet engine's roar drown out the ache in my chest. It was over. Not just the trip. Something deeper. When I walked into my house that evening, the silence felt both welcome and heavy. There was no text waiting from her. No, are you home? Or, let me know you landed. Just a void that settled around me like dust. I dropped my suitcase in the hallway and sat down on the stairs, too drained to even take off my shoes. The light from the front porch spilled in through the window, and everything looked exactly how I had left it, except me. I didn't feel like the man who boarded that plane a week ago. That man was hopeful. That man had booked 7 nights of memories, had believed he was being given a gift, a rare opportunity to reconnect with his daughter before her life pulled her permanently in another direction. But now, all I could think about was how naive that had been, how blind I'd been to the truth of my place in her life. I wasn't the warm-up before her big future. I was the support beam she didn't see anymore, unless it cracked beneath her feet. I opened my laptop that night without really knowing what I planned to do. At first, I just wanted to go through the receipts, something to anchor my restless mind. But as I scrolled through the credit card statements, hotel invoices, confirmation emails, and tour tickets, something inside me shifted. I saw the full cost of it all, not just financially, but emotionally. Every charge told a story. That candlelit dinner for 2 I ate alone. That gondola ride she skipped. The wine tasting where she ducked out to meet him. The numbers weren't just numbers anymore. They were reminders. Proof of how thoroughly I had funded my own erasure. And somewhere between the Florence train pass and the Rome hotel upgrade, the idea took shape, not out of pettiness, but principle. If she wanted to use me as a sponsor for her stepdad's European debut, then she could at least pay for the privilege. I itemized everything. Airfare for two, both legs. Hotels, split 50/50ths. Museum entries and tours she didn't attend. Meals where she barely touched her food. I left off a few things, souvenirs I bought her, the clothes she picked out that I never saw her wear. I wasn't trying to be vindictive. I just wanted to draw a line. To show that what she saw as a harmless choice, blending her lives without permission, had a cost. Emotional labor wasn't quantifiable. But this I could count. I attached the spreadsheet to an email with a short message. Since this wasn't the trip we agreed on, I've adjusted the expenses accordingly. Please pay back your portion by the end of the month. No hard feelings, just clarity. I read it over twice, then hit send before I could talk myself out of it. The response came the next morning, short, sharp, and furious. Are you serious? You're charging your own daughter? You're a wicked, heartless man. I stared at the screen for a moment, then laughed once, just once, a bitter sound that didn't last. Heartless? No. If anything, I'd been too full of heart. That was the whole problem. I had let my hope, my nostalgia, my desperate wish to matter, blind me to what was happening in front of me. She hadn't asked me directly to bankroll her stepfather's vacation, but she had allowed it, encouraged it, justified it in her mind as something sweet and sentimental, instead of selfish and inconsiderate. And when I stepped out of that narrative, when I stopped playing my part, I became the villain. Not because I'd done anything cruel, but because I'd finally said no. My ex called me later that day, furious. What are you doing? She barked, not even saying hello. She's crying. She says you've completely lost it. I didn't match her anger. I was done raising my voice. I asked her to pay for the portion of a trip she repurposed for someone else. That's it. She scoffed. You're her father. You're supposed to give without keeping score. That's when the dam broke, but not the way she expected. I have given without keeping score, I said, quietly but firmly. For over a decade, I've swallowed every eye roll, every last-minute cancellation, every time she compared me to him and found me boring. I've shown up, paid up, shut up. And she turned our trip into a gift for the man who replaced me. So no, I'm not covering the cost of that. Silence. A long one. Then she said, softer now, she didn't mean it like that. I sighed. Maybe not, but that's how it felt. And I'm allowed to say that. What surprised me most wasn't the anger. It was how quickly the gossip started to circulate. A cousin texted, asking if it was true that I'd sent her a bill. A coworker pulled me aside, half laughing, asking, is this about that Italy thing I heard from Brian's wife? That's when I realized how small the world gets when you break from the script. I wasn't playing the understanding dad anymore. I had disrupted the image they all preferred, the man who showed up with open arms and a quiet wallet. And now that I'd asked for accountability, I was the problem. Not her, not the situation, just me. But I didn't back down. I sent the invoice again at the end of the week, this time with a note. This isn't punishment. It's a mirror. Look at it. I didn't expect her to reply. She didn't. But 3 weeks later, I saw the deposit. Quiet, exact, and impersonal. She didn't write a message. Didn't offer a peace offering. Just paid what was owed and left the silence between us in place. And honestly, I preferred it that way. Because in that moment, the transaction finally matched the relationship. Cold, distant, unspoken. I didn't chase her. Didn't text a thank you. Didn't send a follow-up. I took that payment and marked the invoice, paid in full. Not just financially, but emotionally, too. I was done chasing approval, done begging for crumbs of connection. I had made the mistake of thinking this trip was about us. It wasn't. It was about her rewriting her history to fit the people she prioritized now. And that was fine, but not on my dime. The thing about family drama is that it rarely stays inside the walls where it starts. It leaks, trickles, spreads, sometimes like smoke, sometimes like wildfire. And this one, it caught faster than I expected. At first, it was little things. A vague Facebook post from Marcus that read, "Some people only understand love when it costs them nothing." He didn't tag anyone, but he didn't have to. He only had one family trip in the last month, and the timing made the message loud enough to hear from across a continent. My brother liked it. My ex left a comment with a heart emoji. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what they were doing. Framing me as the bitter dad who couldn't handle his daughter growing up and choosing someone else to bond with. It was easier for them to believe I was cruel than to ask why she had turned a one-on-one trip with her father into a secret double act with her stepdad. Then came the calls. Not a flood, but enough to remind me that no story stays neutral when people have their own guilt to protect. My sister, who's always been closer to my ex than she is to me, phoned under the guise of checking in. But it didn't take long before she got to the point. "You know, this whole trip thing. It just seems like a big misunderstanding." I asked her what, exactly, had been misunderstood. "She thought you'd be okay with it," she said, her tone too light, too rehearsed. "She thought maybe you'd be proud of her for making it special for someone else." I nearly laughed. Proud? Of being sidelined? Of being turned into a walking credit card? I took a deep breath and said, "She could have planned that with him. But she didn't. She let me believe it was our time. That's not a misunderstanding. That's manipulation." My sister sighed, probably annoyed that I wasn't folding into the narrative she'd already accepted. "You're making this bigger than it is," she said. And with that, I knew there was no point in continuing. She wasn't calling to understand. She was calling to convince me to let it go. But what surprised me most was who did speak up in my defense. An old friend of mine, Mark, called after seeing some indirect post about parental cruelty that had apparently made its way into one of those family group chats I was no longer in. We hadn't spoken in months, but he was one of the few people who had watched me during the rough years of the divorce. He knew how often I picked up the slack. Knew the birthday parties I planned solo, the times I'd driven across town at 9 p.m. just because she forgot a textbook at my place. He didn't open with pleasantries. He just said, "You were right to charge her. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I exhaled like I'd been holding my breath for days. He continued, "There's a difference between being generous and being used. You've always given." She needed to learn what it feels like to take something seriously. I didn't realize how much I needed someone to say that until he did. Validation, when it's rare, hits like water in a desert. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel crazy. But even with that support, the tension only grew. I started hearing little things through the grapevine. That I had humiliated her. That she felt like a stranger to her own dad. That she was rethinking the relationship. And each of those phrases was so familiar, so choreographed, it was almost laughable. Because for years, that's how they painted me when I set a boundary. When I didn't go along with the fantasy version of events that everyone else preferred. The version where Marcus was the hero and I was the sideshow. The version where I should just be grateful to have any time with her at all, even if it came filtered through someone else's script. But I wasn't playing that role anymore. I had taken off the costume. And now they were scrambling to find someone else to blame for the broken picture. The final straw came when my daughter posted a series of photos from the trip, ones I hadn't seen before. Her and Marcus in front of the Trevi Fountain. Her and Marcus at the Uffizi Gallery. Her and Marcus eating the kind of food I'd reserved for the two of us. There was no mention of me in the caption. No acknowledgement. Not even a simple "thank you to Dad for making this possible." I was invisible. Again. Scrolling through those images, something in me hardened. It wasn't just that she left me out. It was that she had replaced me without hesitation. With joy. With pride. And then posted it like I was never part of the story. Like I hadn't been the one to stitch together every single detail of that trip from miles away, months in advance, fueled only by hope that I still mattered. But here's the thing. Being left out hurts less when you finally accept that the inclusion you were waiting for was never genuine. I had clung to the idea that this trip would prove something, that it would be the bridge back to a closeness I missed, that it would remind her who I was to her, and who she used to be with me. But instead, it exposed the gap, showed me just how far she'd drifted, how different her definition of family had become. And it also gave me clarity. I don't want to beg for love anymore. Not from her. Not from anyone. Love offered with conditions isn't love. It's leverage. And I'm done being leveraged. I started telling people the truth. Not dramatically. Not with bitterness. Just plainly. Yeah, I charged her for the trip. She used it to travel with her stepdad behind my back. Most people blinked in surprise. A few winced. One or two nodded quietly, like they'd experienced something similar. But I didn't care what they thought anymore. The people who mattered understood. And the ones who didn't? They never really saw me in the first place. This wasn't about teaching her a lesson. It was about teaching myself that I didn't have to keep absorbing disrespect just because it came wrapped in family ties. It's been 4 months since I got that last message from her. The one that simply read, "Don't ever speak to me again." I remember staring at it for longer than I should have, wondering if I should respond, if I should try to clarify my side one last time, if I should explain that boundaries aren't a lack of love, but a form of self-respect. But I didn't. I let the message sit in my inbox, like a sealed door. Because that's what it was, a declaration, not a conversation. And for the first time in our relationship, I didn't chase her. I didn't call, didn't apologize, didn't ask for a second chance to be included. I simply closed the laptop, took a deep breath, and stood still. And you know what? Stillness is underrated. After years of walking on eggshells, trying to be the version of a father she wanted, cool enough to be tolerated, generous enough to be useful, quiet enough to stay unthreatening, it felt revolutionary just to stop performing. People talk about peace like it's a state you arrive at by accident. Like one day you just wake up and the storm inside you has passed. But my peace came in pieces. It came in doing my laundry without feeling the ache of a trips and used souvenir shirt. It came in returning the extra photo book I ordered, the one I'd planned to give her as a Christmas gift, full of pictures of our special week. It came in having a quiet dinner alone and not feeling ashamed of the silence. The pain didn't leave overnight. It still hasn't, if I'm being honest. There are days I walk past families at restaurants and feel a sting. Days I look at the shelf where our old photo albums sit and wonder when exactly the shift happened. But pain and peace can coexist. I used to think setting a boundary would mean slamming a door so loud it echoed. But in truth, it was more like locking a gate that had been left open too long and finally saying, "No more through traffic." Not like this. What surprised me most, though, was how quickly the quiet became a comfort. Without the constant second-guessing, the overanalysis, the phone calls I dreaded but felt obligated to answer, my days started to feel lighter. I began to remember who I was before I became a man defined by how well I could shrink himself for someone else's convenience. I spent weekends hiking again, not because I was trying to distract myself, but because I wanted to hear my own thoughts. I joined a community center near my place and started teaching an intro to photography course. Something I hadn't done since she was in middle school. There's something incredibly grounding about sharing what you love without anyone expecting more from you than your presence. And for the first time in a long time, I was showing up for myself, not just as a shadow in someone else's story. That doesn't mean I stopped loving her. Love doesn't dissolve just because it isn't returned in the way you hoped. I still think of her on Tuesdays, for some reason. That was always the day we did our little rituals when she was younger. Pancake dinners, movie nights, board games we never finished. Those memories still exist, still breathe somewhere inside me. But they belong to a version of us that's gone. And that's okay. Part of growing up, for both parents and children, is grieving the version of each other you once had. I've stopped trying to make her see what she did. That's not my job. My job is to protect the version of myself that gave without resentment, loved without keeping score, and eventually learned that self-respect is not abandonment. It's preservation. And that bill I sent, it wasn't revenge. It was my line in the sand. Not a punishment, but a pause. One I needed to take to save whatever shred of dignity I had left. A few weeks ago, I ran into someone who used to know us, my daughter and me, back when things were simpler. He asked how she was doing, and I didn't lie. I said we hadn't spoken in a while. He raised his eyebrows and said, "That's a shame. You two were so close." And for a moment, I almost slipped into the usual script, deflect, excuse, make it sound like a temporary rough patch. But instead, I just nodded and said, "We were." That's it. We were. Past tense. And there was grief in that, but also grace. Because acknowledging what's lost is the first step in learning to live without it. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for yourself is accept the distance instead of chasing a connection that keeps wounding you. Every so often, I still check my email, half wondering if she'll write. Not to pay me back, I never cared about the money. But maybe to ask how I am. Maybe to say she finally understood. But I don't wait. That's the difference. I'm not building my days around hope anymore. I've learned that boundaries are not the absence of love. They are the structure in which love can survive, if it ever chooses to return. If she ever does reach out again, I'll read the message slowly, carefully, without rushing to respond. I'll measure it against the version of myself I've fought hard to rebuild. And if it's real, honest, remorseful, I'll decide then. Not out of guilt, not out of duty, but from the clarity that comes when peace finally outweighs longing. I paid for that peace with silence, distance, and the painful truth that sometimes doing the right thing for yourself feels wrong in the moment. But here's what I know now. I was not wicked. I was not heartless. I was a father who reached his limit, who asked for respect, and, when it wasn't given, chose to protect his own heart instead. There's power in that. There's healing in that. And while I'll always carry the ache of what could have been, I no longer carry the shame of pretending it didn't hurt. I stood up. I said enough. And now, I sleep through the night, knowing I chose myself when no one else did. Have you ever had to choose peace over closeness, especially with someone you love? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Was I wrong to draw a line, or was it long overdue? If this story resonated with you, like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more real-life stories where love, boundaries, and hard truths collide. Your voice matters here, and you never know who might feel a little less alone because you spoke up. See you soon in the next story.